Hello, this is Angela with Parker's Permaculture. It's a lovely summer day here in Portland, Oregon. I'm hiding in the shade because it's a little too sunny. I'm sitting under my hazelnut tree here in a corner of my permaculture food forest. I wanted to talk today about 4 common myths that folks believe when they first start gardening. So these are commonly held myths that I hope to break down today. Now, while I have a permaculture garden here in the city, I have also practiced apartment gardening in pots. I've practiced rural gardening with long straight rows and a tractor. I've experienced with a diversity of methods, and for me, I've settled on permaculture design because I feel that it is the most effective and it is the most beneficial for humans and for the planet. And so that's why I use that method. But these 4 myths here I think are pretty easy to bust up for any kind of gardening that you practice. So let's dive into them right now. So myth number 1, you need to till. I've never owned a tiller. I have once borrowed a rototiller from a friend. I have also used a tractor to till up our large garden on the coast. Tilling is something that we have been told that we have to do because so many of us are gardening in places with very compacted soil. Whether it's compacted because of excessive human traffic over it, compacting the soil, or perhaps there used to be structures there, or perhaps the soil is just so eroded and depleted that there isn't any rich loamy matter left. It's all the dense subsoil that is very easily compacted and very, very difficult to plant in. So the practice of tilling is one that does break up and loosen your soil, and a lot of folks think it's really necessary. I've got to till the garden every spring. I've got to turn under all of those weeds, and I've got to loosen up the soil. I don't till here at all. Any method where the blades of the tiller or the blades of your plow are turning up, flipping over, and exposing those typically buried and protected layers of the soil to the baking hot sun, that's not good for your soil. It doesn't happen in nature. We do have critters in nature such as moles who do a really good job of aerating the soil by digging tunnels, and they do push up some mounds, but they don't till over all of the earth and expose all of those protected layers and all of the ecology of the soil to the baking rays of the sun and the elements. That's not how nature works. And in permaculture, we try to mimic systems in nature because they're highly effective, and we can't do any better than Mother Nature does. So when we're tilling, the long-term consequences of tilling are that we're actually damaging the soil microbiome. The soil doesn't want to be churned up like that. The second thing that we're doing is we're creating a hard pan layer at the bottom of the till blade. So yes, up here where the blade is tilling, it's loosening and fluffing all of that soil. But where the blade is scraping at the bottom of its depth, it is creating a super compacted hard layer. And so you're not actually helping your soil loosen in the long term. It's sort of cosmetic in many ways, because what you're doing is you're making a very compact layer, about 18 inches down depending on the depth of your blade, and then you're fluffing this material up here and you're desiccating it, you're exposing it to the sun, and you're killing the soil life that is in it. So instead of tilling, what I do here is that I actually plant a lot of plants for the sole purpose of having them go down and bust up the soil and create better drainage. So I use rhubarb, I use comfrey, I use horseradish carefully because once you plant it, you have got it forever. I use radishes with deep roots. All of these plants do a really good job of, on their own, growing and opening up dense soil. Now that kind of a process takes time, and you may find in your annual veggie beds that your soil needs to be loosened so you can plant in the spring. Instead of tilling, I would encourage you to use something like a broad fork or even a pitchfork. Put it down in the soil, rock it, and loosen it just enough that you can get in and plant things without churning over those layers of the soil. At the same time, I would encourage you to add biomass to the top. So you're taking what often is very depleted, hard subsoil with a high mineral content but a low organic content, and you're adding organic biomass on top, be it from mulch, be it from leaf mold, be it from compost, and you are building up the soil and creating a soil with tilth. You're creating tilth. You're creating a healthy, workable, friable soil. So there are these other methods such as broad forking, loosening the soil, building up the soil, even using raised beds that can help if you have really compacted soil that needs to be remediated, right? That needs some help to get it going. If you don't have years to wait for the plants to do it on their own with their roots, if you need to have a little bit more of a human time scale and not an ecological time scale, it still doesn't mean you have to till. So myth number 2 is that you have to use insecticides and pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. The solution to our problems is not to spray. And I've talked about this in many other videos. Spraying is coming from a mindset of us dominating the garden, of us coming in and thinking that we need to eradicate or eliminate problems in the garden. That the reason that our plants all have squash vine borer is because they are just a scourge and we need to eradicate them. When you use herbicides and pesticides and fungicides and insecticides, you are creating a cycle where you are perhaps initially knocking back the population, but that 1 or 2 or 3 or 10% still live. And those are the fungi and the pests that are resistant to those poisons that you've used. So over time, it's much like how overuse of antibiotics has created superbugs, right? Has created MRSA. When we choose to treat in a way that is poisoning and is seeking to obliterate most of the population of our pests, we are actually accelerating and promoting the evolution of pests that are resistant to all of the chemical agents that we use. And so what we find over time is we have to use more of them. We have to use stronger ones. We have to come up with new ones that are more toxic, more potent. And our plants still have problems with pest and disease. So the permaculture solution is that we work toward balance. I don't ever want to eradicate all of the pests in my garden because those pests are food for natural predators, birds, lizards, snakes, amphibians, dragonflies. So what I want to do instead is I want to create balance. I want to promote a garden that has space and habitat for wildlife, for those predatory species. I want to promote the health of the soil so that my plants are as strong as they can possibly be and can fend off those diseases that may come for them. I want to plant a diversity of crops so that I don't have all my eggs in one basket. So if something struggles in one year, that I have other crops that will do really well. And also so that my plants are spread out so that a disease cannot come through and say, aha, monoculture, I can just sweep through and obliterate like the Spanish flu. I can just sweep through this whole population of raspberry plants and kill them all. Well, I have 6 or 7 different varieties of raspberry plant. And perhaps that pathogen can't attack all of them. And also they're spread out around the garden, so it's harder for pathogens to jump or pests to jump from plant to plant to plant. So using those permaculture design strategies, we find it's really not necessary to ever spray with insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. You don't need to do it. It's a myth. You just have to design differently. So the third myth that folks buy into early on is that weeds are bad. Now, there's a whole lot on the internet right now. Lately, I think it's really, really good trying to educate people that weeds can be communicators to you as the gardener. Weeds are often opportunistic, they're often pioneer species. They often are the kind of plants that can colonize areas that are deficient in certain vitamins and nutrients, areas that are disturbed, areas that are lacking something. So when you have those weeds move in, you can actually cross-source pretty easily on the internet. If this weed is present in my garden, what are the conditions here that are favorable to that weed? And how can I change the conditions to eliminate those weeds? So is my weed communicating to me actually of really nitrogen poor soil? I'm a nitrogen fixing pioneer species. I love sun and I love nitrogen poor soil where I have very little competition and I fix my own nitrogen. So what is the solution there? Is it to weed all of those nitrogen fixing weeds like clover? No, the solution is actually to let the weed go ahead and fix nitrogen in your ground. Vetch, I love vetch even though it's a weed here. Hairy vetch is a weed. It is a nitrogen fixer. It is a pioneer species. It will come in and help improve the quality of my soil, and it is able to thrive there because other plants aren't. So I use my weeds as a communicator. The other thing is that weeds in general are what you make of them. Right? So now I'm not talking about noxious weeds, really invasive weeds, but I mean those garden variety weeds. They are what you make of them. Do you really need to pull them up? Is it an aesthetic thing? Because weeds are filling a vacuum. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. And Mother Nature does not like open, bare soil. She wants to fill it either with mulch, either with decaying biomass, or with living biomass. So weeds often come in and communicate to you like, hey, you had a space here where there was no competition for me. And so I took up this space. If you want to take me out, maybe consider filling that space with something else, be it mulch or be it another plant. But also, weeds shade the ground and conserve water loss. I talk about that so much on this channel. Everyone views weeds as like, this is just constant competition for water with my veggies. But actually, when you have companion plants, and weeds are essentially functioning as a companion plant here, they shade the ground, they reduce water loss through evaporation. Far more water is wasted by bare, open, baked soil than by having a plant, a weed, growing next to your cultivated plant. So it's totally a myth that you need to weed the weeds. It's based on a lot of classist nonsense, I would say. If you don't like the weeds, maybe examine what they're trying to communicate to you before you pull them up and think, what can I sub in this spot that would fill this niche? So number 4 is that you need to fertilize your plants. Obviously, a lot of the fertilizers that we use are marketed to us from the fertilizer industry. A lot of those fertilizers are the leftovers at the end of World War II from the production of munitions, right? So these munitions factories, they didn't need to keep making bombs and weaponry. They didn't need to keep making things that killed other people. And so what are we going to do with all of these compounds that we have? Well, we've discovered that a lot of these, particularly the petrochemical ones, they're really good at making plants grow big and lush and green. So let's market them to people and tell them that they're necessary and that they're somehow cleaner or more advanced, they're better living through chemistry, they're more advanced than the traditional methods that we've used to build fertility. When you adopt the mindset that you have to use fertilizer, you are thinking that your plants need to be fed by the gardener through an application of basically supplements, right? It's like thinking instead of feeding yourself a healthy, nourishing, well-rounded diet, you just need to take a bunch of vitamins and then you can eat whatever crap you want. The reality is most of these fertilizers that we are putting on our plants are like candy bars, right? They are not health food. They encourage our plants to grow really big, really lush, perhaps larger, greener, and more vigorous than they would otherwise be. And what happens is when you are having these plants grow really rapidly like that, the tissues are actually weaker and more susceptible to pest and disease pressure. So even though you're seeing like, oh my gosh, my Swiss chard is putting out these huge leaves. Oh my gosh, my pepper plant has grown so tall and it's just, sending out leaves everywhere. Those plants are actually weaker and more susceptible to disease, which then puts us into a cycle of needing to use pesticides. Pesticide, fertilizer, which is convenient because the same companies tend to manufacture both. Instead, the permaculture method would be to feed the soil, like we have done in generations past, like Mother Nature does. We don't need to spend our energy or time using carbon-heavy, petroleum-mined products to put them on our garden in order to have lush harvests. What we need to do is look to the systems in nature. How do we build fertility in nature? We feed the soil. We don't feed the plant, we feed the soil. And then the soil feeds the plant. So we want to increase biomass. We want to remineralize soil that has been depleted using rock dust, using Arctic, glacial rock dust amendments. We want to focus on being dirt farmers. We want to focus on feeding the soil, and then the healthy habitat we've created will foster strong, vigorous plants that produce well for us. We don't need to have some set schedule of NPK fertilizers. That's such a really modern notion in the last 80 years or so, and I'm looking forward to a time when that notion is outdated, particularly as we are learning about the long-term health implications and the long-term unsustainability of using such products. So thank you for watching my video today. I hope that you got something out of it. I hope that if you are a gardener who has been susceptible to these myths in the past, I know that it's really, really easy when all of the marketing, all of the communication, all of the kind of stereotypical suburban 1950s-esque messages that are still perpetuated in our gardening groups, in our popular culture, are just being whispered in our ear all the time. It's like that mosquito in your ear. But there's another way. You can look at the diverse, naturalistic, abundant permaculture design system that I have in my garden and realize that there are other ways to have a highly productive and beautiful garden that don't rely on these four myths. You can chuck them out the door and you can still have a big, beautiful, lush garden. Thank you for watching today. Please check out my Patreon down below. And also, YouTube has recently added a little thanks feature, so you might check that out on my videos. I will be back soon for my permaculture garden. Bye.